Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the PetroNerds podcast. My name is Trisha Curtis. I'm the CEO of PetroNerds and the host of the PetroNerds podcast. Today is April 24th, 2025. It is Thursday. This is episode 130 of the PetroNerds podcast, and I am absolutely pumped and super delighted to put a very short, sweet intro on this podcast because this is the long-awaited podcast. This is from the Houston Producers Forum, HPF, as folks know in Houston. This is a extremely short, tight, heavy hitting podcast that I gave on March 18th, 2025. So a lot has happened between March 18th and now, but really important is that at the time, right, March 18th, you were already starting to feel a lot of consternation in the market, right? You were already starting to feel a lot of oil producers and operators really question what was going on with the Trump administration, especially with regards to price and this drill baby drill agenda. And that is something that I've heard a absolute constant between. I have been traveling a lot lately. I was in Washington D.C. in early March. Then I went to the Houston Producers Forum in Houston. Then I was in Lubbock, Texas. Then I went to Butte, or I went to Colorado School of Mines here in Golden. Then I went to Butte, Montana at Montana Tech, and then I went back to Lubbock. And I can tell you everything I heard from folks within the classroom and industry leaders, and everyone asked the same question, and that was really, what does drill baby drill mean, and what does Trump want for oil prices? And so at the time, the fact that this was being asked is interesting to me because Chris Wright and Burgum and a lot of others were in Oklahoma today, in Oklahoma City at the Ham Institute. Chris Wright was interviewed on Bloomberg, and he was talking about coal, but he was also, I think, it was probably asked a lot of questions on oil. Now, on March 18th, we had oil prices at $68 a barrel, and we had natural gas prices at $4 an MCF. So definitely a world of difference than where we're at today. Now, we've had a lot of volatility since then. And so this podcast, I think, is a really great listen. One, because I shove the entire world into these 40 minutes. And also the questions that the audience has they're really, really good. So you have a lot of heavy hitters in the audience. They ask excellent questions. So I am just really pumped to have this podcast drop because I think you guys are going to absolutely love it. Now, if you're watching this podcast, you're watching this intro right now, you're seeing I'm wearing this awesome PetroNerds shirt. If you want one, there's a way to get one. In addition to this awesome PetroNerds Yeti that you see here, become a PetroNerds podcast sponsor. So the other thing I can tell you is that right now, everyone has questions on where oil prices are going, what they need, where oil prices are going, where's the economy? Well, the economy is oil prices, right? So I try to say simplistically to folks that geopolitics is supply and the economy is demand, right? So everybody's trying to wrap their arms around this. And I can tell you that a lot of folks are tuning into the PetroNerds podcast and they're coming to PetroNerds for that intel. So now is a great opportunity to actually become a sponsor. I'll hook you up with the Getty, which is on both sides, as well as this awesome t-shirt, which my sister helped me make, but they're really great. So with that, we're going to do the short, sweet intro right now. April 24th, 2025, we were sitting at 62.82. So March 18th, we were at $68 a barrel, which is this conversation you're going to listen to, this presentation, this talk at the Houston Producers Forum, this mic drop conversation, and $4 an MCF. Now, today, we're looking at Brent at $66 a barrel. We're looking at Henry Hub at $2.91. So that is really serious that we've come off from Henry Hub significantly. Dutch TTF, or European natural gas prices, have come off as well. We're looking at $11.21. But if you have pressure, so if you're starting to see real pressure in WTI well below the 60s and lower natural gas prices, the math is not going to work. You are just not going to give operators the incentive to drill. And so I do think it's important to think about, where are oil prices and are they at where they should be? And that's what I'm going to spend this few minutes in this introduction talking about. We also have the 10-year yield, and that we should spend a minute on that as well. The 10-year yield is at 4.313%. So the 10-year yield is staying up there. It's not 4.5, it's not pushing 5, but it's up there. And so it's retreated a little bit, and part of that retreat comes whenever there's comments from Bessent or comments from Trump that they're going to make a deal or something, some reprieve on tariffs, right? There's a little bit of movement. So also 4.31% is relatively, it's okay. We're not seeing that push up to 5%, but it's telling you that we do have decent debt. It's telling you that we have high debt levels in the US. It's also telling you that we have inflation, and it's not up for the right reasons, right? So it's pressured up for some of those reasons. Now, oil prices coming down and 10-year yields going up is also telling you that you have some pain points in the economy, right? These are not the greatest things you want to see together. And so if you see them going up in tandem the way they sort of were, years ago, in the past few years, that's telling you that you have upward momentum on the economy, inflationary pressures, and so you are going to see oil prices because you have that inflation and it's demand driven, and things aren't breaking. Now you're starting to see that weakness in oil prices. Now, I really absolutely think that oil prices are oversold. So at 62.82, we are still oversold. We're not way oversold, but we are oversold. And so that $68 a barrel in March, that's pretty healthy. Now that was down, and the reason sentiment was down at the time is because in those question marks on what does drill baby drill mean and what does Trump want for oil prices, the sentiment was down already because we were coming off of $80 a barrel, which it never should have been there in January. So you just have to keep that in mind. So with the 10-year yield at 4.313%, it's okay. It's not super high. It's not super low, but it's telling you a few things. And it's telling you that we can't have super low 10-year yield, which means we're going to have decently high mortgage rates still. And our mortgage rates they're just under 7%. So they're still very, very high. And so all this consternation, still have high mortgage rates, still have high inflation, relatively on many levels, you still have high inflation. All these are weighing on the consumer, and you're really starting to see this. I've been talking about this for years. I talk about it within this talk. I've been talking about on previous podcasts and to clients, is that you've seen years of pain for the consumer. They've finally come home to roost. So whether it's Gucci or whether it's Louis Vuitton or whether it's Chipotle, that's what you're hearing loss of sales and earnings. So I years ago I was talking about the fact that if you were to order Chipotle to your house on DoorDash or something, or even on Chipotle.com, it was like on an app, you were paying $2. It's like $50 for two people for a burrito and some chips and salsa or whatever that is. That's extremely expensive for just a fast food quick run. So I think people are finally tapped out of the over $11 for a burrito. And so people are choosing to eat at home. And so that's where you're seeing at Chipotle, they were down, there was a miss. And then you're seeing Gucci and Louis Vuitton and all these guys on the high end also pressured. And so when I was talking before, and when I talk about within this talk about the airlines as well as the Costco and Kohl's, that's what you're seeing. And we continue to see that. So this was a month ago, but we continue to see this in all the earnings that come out. So, and we have to connect this back to the economy. So sometimes folks, they don't realize why I spend so much time talking about the economy, because that is oil prices, right? That's the driver. And so when you're looking at the US and China and you're looking at the health of these two economies, you have to have very healthy growth in the global economy to see upward momentum and pressure on oil prices for the right reasons. We can absolutely see price spikes this year. And I do say that at 62.82, prices are oversold. They probably should be at least $65 a barrel right now. Prices in the 62, and oh my gosh, 2 weeks ago when we saw $56 a barrel, certainly that was giving lots of folks in the oil and gas industry consternation. Then a week later, we saw 64 within a week. So lots of volatility. Part of that is because we've seen a lot. We lost a lot of trading in oil in WTI during COVID that never came back. We have a massive amount of algorithmic trading. So oil is trading on lots of things, right? Every time there's a headline, every time there's a concern in the economy, we had the big sell off. That was because of the overall whole sell off in the stock market and the tariff day and everything that the subsequent after April 2nd, the major sell off. Oil went with it for a moment, gold went with it, and now gold is back up. So you have to just be careful of this. When you see $5 swings in oil prices, that those are not supply and demand fundamentals. And so 62.82 is better reflecting that than obviously 56, but probably should be north of 65, just given the major geopolitical risk right now with the very hot wars that we have in Ukraine, the fact that we do not have a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, and the fact that we still have these ongoing hot wars in the Middle East with Gaza, and with Hamas and Israel. So that's still very much ongoing. And so if we're sanctioning Iran, and last week when we saw oil prices at 64, that's what it was driven off of, right? Oil prices were really ratcheting up, and that was the enhanced pressure that the U.S. is putting on Iran. Now, the U.S. is going to continue to put pressure on Iran. We are going after the Houthis within the Red Sea. And so all this should actually to be somewhat supportive of oil prices. Now, if OPEC adds a bunch of barrels and we don't have those barrels taken off and the timing is wrong, then oil prices will suffer. As I talk in this conversation and presentation, we do have this sort of floor or Trump put with the SPR. That's not really well discussed within the marketplace at all. I don't hear that being talked about in the stock market. But I also think that this timing of when you're placing on sanctions, whether or not you're going to get a deal with Russia, it's been a month. We haven't not seen a deal with Russia. Now, there's positive talk about that. Trump talked about that yesterday. Trump also talked about, maybe meeting, making some movement or some momentum with China. that's not actually happening. There aren't meetings taking place with China right now. There might be some lower level meetings, but there's certainly not talks between Trump and Xi. So that's not taking place right now. So, but those headlines are moving the market. And so 62.82, selling off a little bit from last week. That means probably it was bid up. You're just seeing these big swings that I say are not supply and demand driven. And so we have to wait a while for everything to work out in the wash to really see where it should be. But right now, I think it's absolutely oversold. As of right now, oil prices, I think, are pulling forward fears of recession and recession risk. And so they're putting that into oil prices, and you have relatively thin trading. Now, with that, I'm going to let you listen to this very fun, heavy-hitting talk that I gave at the Houston Producers Forum. Chris Wright was in Oklahoma City today, and his interview on Bloomberg, he said something about coal, which I thought was really honest and really telling. He said, look, when he was asked on Bloomberg if the growth of the coal sector is actually going to grow, he said, how important coal was to electricity and the fact of giving electricity and how important it was for energy security and the fact that you can just stack it up next to your power plant. But also that we probably weren't going to grow the amount of coal within the grid. But the most important thing was that we were going to stop decommissioning it. And I have a chunk of coal here behind me. I think it's so incredibly important to be thinking about coal and electricity and energy and natural gas also in this entire context that we're thinking about. So with that, folks, I'm going to let you listen to this heavy hitting 40-minute talk that is a round the world tour. We cover everything from oil prices, oil price drivers, CERA week, the capitulation that we saw in CERA week, which was just before this talk, geopolitics from Russia to Ukraine, Iran, everything China, the Chinese economy, economic uncertainty and tariffs I get into, and I talk about energy being everything. We get into power generation, and I close this talk by talking about energy dominance and the ability for the U.S. to the 13.5 million barrels a day that we are producing and what that means from an actual energy dominance perspective. So with that, folks, hope you listen to really enjoy the podcast, share it with your friends, really look forward to the feedback, and I'll talk to you soon, folks. Bye.
With that, I will introduce Trisha Curtis.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So we have a lot of ground to cover, and I'm told I have 40 minutes. So I'm taking all of those 40 minutes. If you need to get up, that's totally fine. I think you're going to want me to take the 40 minutes. So I'm going to try to talk slow and fast at the same time. So we're going to cover oil, the economy, geopolitics, and I say buckle up because we're in for a ride. I don't even have time to advertise the podcast, so that's there, which you should listen. I should probably have a lot of you as guests as well. So big takeaways. So I'm gonna target, going 40 minutes. You can yell at me and say stop. But I do want to take time to answer questions, and I'm going to hang around after. But the big takeaway is I want to talk about oil price drivers. I want to talk about the CERA week and a little bit of capitulation that I think we heard from folks at CERA week. And I want to remind folks to remember to be humble, where I talked about this to the board before, but there are a lot of forecasts we put out there, and we typically do these forecasts in times of volatility, and we extrapolate what we know now going out. And it is always, always incorrect. Geopolitics. Holy crap. We have a lot to cover on geopolitics. Russia, Ukraine. My phone wasn't updating, but there was a very long call between Trump and Putin just now. In the Middle East, we have Israel going after Iran. We've got, I was updating these slides over the weekend and trying to show you a map of the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea. And literally as I'm doing it, Trump announces they're going after the Houthis that are just south of Saudi Arabia. And then the important realizing this is that the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, those are all backed by Iran. And so this administration is taking a hard line on Iran, saying we are pushing back on Iran. I think it's a really, really smart move. But that means that we have volatility in the Middle East. We are not seeing a massive geopolitical risk premium on oil prices, regardless of that. And that's telling you, oil prices are telling you a lot right now. And then you got Saudi Arabia being pretty silent. I mean, the fact that Saudi Arabia has given a nod to Trump saying they're going to add barrels back to the market, outside of that, they've been pretty silent in all of this, even though they have for years had a war with Yemen on south of their border. And then China, really all roads lead to China. China is the thread between Iran. They're threaded with Iran. They're threaded with Russia. They're funding Russia's war. They're buying all the oil from Iran. And so if you don't, if the tariffs are not about China, they damn well should be. And so we're going to get to that point in here. I'm going to address economic uncertainty and tariffs. Not so much tariffs because a lot of it has not landed yet, but I'm happy to talk about that candidly. But really want to spend time talking about this economic uncertainty and the health of the consumer, which is not great. And then I want to thread in, energy is everything. Bottom line, absolutely everything. The ability to turn these lights on and to eat the food we have was made with energy. And we are not doing a good job as a country with the largest amount of oil and natural gas and coal in the entire world. We are not doing a good job embracing it. We should have much lower electricity prices than anyone in the world. We should have not had the rise in electricity prices we had over the past 4 years. And we have to address these things. So when you hear what Chris Wright is saying when he said it at CERA Week or he said it otherwise, this is what he's talking about, is using the energy you have and lowering those costs. But within all that, there's about a gazillion things to talk about within all of this. So I'm condensing this down. I spend 2 hours with boards and CEOs and executives ripping through all of this, and then we spend another hour asking questions and talking about it. So the point is, I'm giving you a little teaser. And then I'm going to close with the U.S. oil and gas production dominance, is the fact that I really do think, despite having lower prices, we are poised to be in a very good position for U.S. oil and gas production and strength, and what we're doing just more with less. Okay, so WTI, at least when I did this morning, we were sitting at $68 a barrel, and Henry Hub over $4. The real point I want to make here is that the reason that we've seen the pressure that we have seen on oil prices, and we had $80 a barrel in January, that was because the Biden administration put sanctions on Russian vessels. Those were not implemented because oil prices spiked to 80. Basically, it was a lot of short covering and rolling off shorts and going long and lots of back and forth on trading. But the reality was that we didn't actually see it, right? It didn't materialize. It wasn't real. That was 1.5 million barrels a day that would have been pulled off the market via tankers from Russia. And that didn't happen. So oil prices have since moved down. Now, we have a lot of geopolitical volatility for as low as prices are, an absolute massive amount. But if you look at Henry Hub prices, we've moved back down to 4. That's the bright spot. I think people are not appreciating the fact that you can have lower oil prices and higher natural gas prices and do well in this industry. It is not as great as having $75 oil. No, it's not. But it's still better than having $60 oil and $2 nat gas. And we did have $2 nat gas last year. So you've seen Dutch TTF prices, European natural gas prices. Those have really moved down. And that is literally just a simple trade based on where they're going to have molecules flowing from Russia to Germany in pipelines that they're going to have all this natural gas flowing back into Europe. And this is despite people not wanting this deal with Trump or not wanting this deal with Putin or not wanting a ceasefire, whatever's going on, and the fact that you're seeing massive trading going on in Germany where people are thinking that Germany is going to invest in their industrial sector, which their industrial sector is a mess, but that they're going to invest in defense. Well, I have a newsflash, people. You have to have electricity and you have to have power generation to invest in your defense, to make the ammunition. And so Germany's going to have a wake-up call because I'm going to show you their grid, and it doesn't look good. So the winds have absolutely changed. That's the previous administration. That's what they had on their website for energy. It was all about investing in wind and solar. I am critical of this because they're just not good forms of energy, right? They're not energy dense. The power density of wind is 1,000 times less than that of natural gas. 1,000 times. By the time I get that wind energy in this light bulb, I've lost a ton of energy, and I just have to have all this redundancy, and it's a mess, and it's really expensive. But that was the Biden administration. That's solar panels back there. Even if those were made in the US, they come from an ingot wafer, which is made in China in the province of Xinjiang with forced labor with coal-fired power generation, because you need a lot of heat and energy to make solar power. And most importantly, you can't really see it, but if you zoom in on that slide, you will see a poster or something that they're looking at. It's a blank piece of paper. It's white. They couldn't even be bothered to put something on it, but it is case in point for the Biden administration and energy, which is a whole lot of nothing. And now we have Chris Wright at the helm of our Department of Energy, and he's just going out and telling truth and facts to everyone. He just blew it away at CERA Week, and one of the biggest takeaways he said in the beginning of his beginning of his 15-minute talk was, yes, you have so-called 6% of wind and solar power as renewables in global primary energy consumption. It's something like 6 to 8%, and he calls it actually half, because you have a thermal equivalent that you have to scale that up to, and it's not even that much. And I would wager that if we took the wind and solar out of the global grid, we would be using actually less natural gas, less natural coal, and less oil, because we have to compensate for all that crappy wind and solar in the grid. So the winds have shifted. Now, Fatih Birol, the head of the IEA, amongst many others, the big takeaway from CERA week was you did have a decent amount of capitulation, right? You had a lot of, definition of capitulation. CNBC is talking about Fatih Birol, talking about investing. We need to invest in oil and gas. Well, I'm just going to tell you what he said in January to Davos. He said, what is more important, energy security or energy transition? I deny to answer this question. It is an annoying question because we can do both. And he's talking as Ursula von der Leyen, the European Central Bank, is there laughing, and her, all these European people are laughing. He's saying this in January. He comes to CERA week in March, and he says we need to invest. Well, he said we needed to invest in 2017 at CERA week 2. The flip-flopping is ridiculous. In IEA in 2020 said, quote, in their 2020 paper up front, they said the IEA has made its own position clear. Since the scale of the COVID-19 crisis began to emerge, we have been leading the calls to put clean energy at the heart of the economic response to secure a sustainable recovery. What the hell does energy have to do with COVID? Nothing, okay? This was massively politicized, and this was not, that IEA lost their way. So the fact that we even give them any credit on this is ridiculous. So at CERA week, what you had was, Scott Sheffield got on CNBC and he was talking about tier 1 and tier 2 and the fact that they actually sold off their acreage to Exxon because they didn't have enough wells and they didn't have the inventory. I'm not sure that was quite fair to say, sort of after the fact, but it did move. The markets talked about it. You heard Occidental and you heard others, Harold Hamm as well, all talking this little kind of getting into this peak oil, this peak shale that we're hitting peak production. And I want y'all to be very, very careful with that because this is just a snapshot. I've done I have 100 slides on this. I've looked at every OPEC, IEA, and EIA report in every major crisis. So just think about 1998 when you had $8 a barrel, and think about 2008 when you had oil prices skyrocketing 140 and then dropping massively. So if you look at these times, what the EIA, IEA, and OPEC all do is they take the moment they're in and they forecast it out. So this is a 2002 energy outlook from EIA, the Energy Information Administration. This is their international outlook. Their high price deck in 2002 was below $40 a barrel all the way out to 2020. Okay, that's not realistic. You'd even think it would move. Oil prices don't do this, but that's what they predicted. They also predicted global demand to be 120 million barrels a day by 2020. We're about 103 million barrels a day demand now. So the point I'm making is they were wrong then. Everyone was wrong. I won't even tell you how much they thought OPEC production was going to be because they thought it would be about 60 million barrels a day, and OPEC production isn't even 30 million barrels a day now. So this stuff is really, really serious. What they got wrong, what everyone got wrong, is that we produce more oil we produce actually more oil at lower oil prices. We didn't demand as much at lower oil prices, and actually the demand goes up whether regard you have high prices or low prices. Now it gets impacted when you have spikes in demand and then you drop, but that's really more about global recessions and the consumer losing steam. Okay, so if these tariffs are not about China, they definitely should be. So this is the de minimis rule. This is something that the Trump administration is working out now. They implemented it and had to roll it back because basically the Postal Service said, we're just not going to take any packages from China. We are getting a ton of stuff from China. The problem is right now a lot of it's coming through Mexico and Vietnam. And so the investment you've seen from China into Mexico and Vietnam has been massive. So when people say, oh my gosh, don't go after your allies, we are getting a crap ton of stuff from China through Mexico. Unfortunately, it's beyond not regulated. De minimis shipments are the shipments that go under the radar. They're $800 per person per day. And so companies like Shein and Temu and all the fast fashion and the crappy t-shirts you can get for $3. By the way, you can't get a t-shirt for $3 unless it's made with forced labor, okay? That's just bar none. It is forced labor. It's made with coal-fired power generation. I don't care about the coal. I care more about the forced labor. That's wrong. But these de minimis shipments, they've just skyrocketed. So we have 600 million packages coming into the US, and a lot of these are coming from China. That has to be addressed. So Europe has a threshold of $150 per shipment, and they're actually reducing that because their economy is getting shredded by China as well, as China dumps all this stuff into their economy. So you see this investment from China into Mexico, into Vietnam. Those are the big ones to watch. So these tariffs that when we're talking about Mexico specifically, those are about China. The Chinese economy, it's very, very messy. It is not good. The Chinese economy is not in good shape, right? They're not going to be the global demand player for oil. We do not have a healthy global economy. And I say this because I've been saying this for years to my clients, for a few years. And we've all kind of thought recession is on the cards for a few years. And I've been telling clients and podcast listeners and folks that I work with that I used to have a slide actually that had white swans and black swans, and I say we're basically standing in the water and there's a bunch of black swans and they're just swimming up to us now. Like, we've been able to see them for years. Like, listen to Jamie Dimon, listen to the stuff he talks about. We see this stuff. It's all out there. It's just a straw that breaks the camel's back. And Stanley Druckenmiller last summer, I think he said on CNBC, he said it really well. Economic crises take years to play out. They take weeks to unfold. And I'm not saying we have one right now or we have a recession. I'm just saying that we have a weakened consumer that's been hit really, really hard with inflation for several years. And now they're starting, the labor side of the economy is starting to weaken. And so you're feeling those straws and the camel's back is about to break. But when we look at China, so that's important to put into perspective because that's the US. The global economy looks like that as well. And China's not doing great, but you see this big bifurcation in the Chinese economy. You have the real estate sector tanking, which is really your consumer economy, and then you have the manufacturing sector rising. That has always been the case. China invests in manufacturing. They have massive amounts of electricity, coal-fired power generation, which underpins the health of their businesses. They can develop AI, they can develop robotics, they can develop all this technology, shipbuilding, everything, because they subsidize everything. It's very, very difficult to compete with that. It's so difficult, especially something as simple as you don't get your energy policy right in the US, you cannot compete with this. And so when you look at DeepSeek and the DeepSeek moment and everybody lost their minds and NVIDIA lost more value in a single day than any stock in US history, all because this chatbot came out from DeepSeek, which was deep, meaning it showed you, everyone downloaded it because it showed you how it was functioning. And China says, we did it in record time, we did it in 2 months and it cost nothing, which is a load of bullshit, sorry. It's a crap. Like, it maybe took 2 months, but they put everything behind it. They threw everything in the kitchen sink behind it. And it's underpinned by a lot of access to energy. So it's just really, really important that China does not compete on profits, and we do. And so you have to get that mindset out of your head that the Chinese are rationally competing. Another way to look at this, this is a really cool nerdy chart. As PetroNerds, we are about to get PetroNerdy. So this is your GDP for China. So that's what you hear all the time is we used to have 20% GDP growth and now we've got 5. They don't have 5% GDP. They probably don't even have 3. It's probably close to 1, if that. But that is oil consumption, that top line. It doesn't make sense that your economy continues to decline and your oil consumption jumps up. Specifically during COVID, when you had zero COVID lockdowns in China, when you shut Shanghai for 2 months, your oil demand does not go up. Okay, so there's a disconnect really happening. Part of this is stockpiling, but also part of this is that the manufacturing sector is going up. They're supporting this war in Russia, they're funding it, and their consumption economy is declining. You see this really, and it's so important on the national security perspective to really, really drill this one home. This is Chinese industrial energy consumption, electricity consumption for industry. That's the red line, straight up, exponential growth. The blue line is us, our US industrial electricity sector. We do have a problem in industry. And something you have heard Chris Wright talk about, he talked about this on my podcast even before he was picked as Trump's energy secretary. He's been talking about manufacturing for a while. This administration is serious about manufacturing, and I think the media and the market is not giving this the credit it deserves. People say, you can't bring the manufacturing jobs back. We're a globalized economy. It's more about, it's not just bringing manufacturing jobs back, it's giving them a situation that they can invest in. It's giving them access to power and electricity, and we have to build this out. The chart on the right is Chinese historical energy consumption, and the real takeaway here is how big that black chunk is. That is coal-fired power generation. Coal-fired power generation is the backbone of the Chinese economy and all of their primary energy consumption. So even in the US, we have well over 30% of our primary energy consumption is oil. In China, it's less than 20%. That is chosen. They don't want the exposure to oil because we often think about wars being fought over oil and how much oil we have, and we are not paying enough attention to the fact that wars are actually fought by how you make things, how you manufacture planes, how you manufacture autos, tanks, how you manufacture ammunition. You do this with a private industrial sector like autos in the US. And if I'm China and I'm playing the long game, I'm going to undercut the crap out of global manufacturing so that when the day comes, no one can compete with me. And that is exactly what they're doing. So This is just a chart that shows you the trade between Russia and China. It's equal. So China is absolutely funding this war with Russia. They're enabling them to do this, in addition to the fact that sanctions haven't done jack. Because Russia is able to export this crude. They get a little bit of a discount, but they've really kept their revenues up. They're also a simple economy. They've done really well in a wartime because they are a simple economy. That's not a great economy, but it's simple. And it means that they didn't have a ton of trade exposure with the world, so they did pretty well. We continue to see China throwing balloons over Taiwan and putting their ships around Taiwan and doing all kinds of stuff there. And then we actually increasingly see them actually going around Australia and just doing live fire drills for kicks and giggles. Russia's war in Ukraine. We are 3+ years into this war. That is a map of the day one. You can see where it's all over the place. Russia invades Ukraine. I can tell you how many people I was talking with, a lot of executives before this happened. A lot of people just didn't believe this was going to happen. It happened. I mean, you have to put the Putin kind of hat on, the rational Western mindset to understand this. Then we're years into this war. They bring in North Korean troops in October. Everybody at this point is putting a lot of chips on the table, right? They're putting their cards on the table because they know that Trump's going to come in and he's going to want to make a deal. And so everybody wants a bunch of stuff to negotiate. So part of this, Zelensky, he goes into Ukraine, he goes into Russia, into this Kursk region, and he pushes in there. It's a huge morale booster for his people. It was a good move there, but then he's exposed. Then the Russians just kind of come around and then they just keep pummeling Ukraine. And so now we're at this stalemate. And honestly, Trump talks about, I know we had the Zelensky-Trump moment, and that was a mess. If you watch that whole press conference, it did not start as a mess. It actually started very diplomatic. It was going really well, and then it ended horribly. Okay, it wasn't great. But since then, we've had more rapprochement between Ukraine and Trump, and things are getting better. I don't know what this phone call with Putin was like. I am not blaming the victim. I am not a fan of Putin. I do not like him. He's a very savvy politician. He does not have Asperger's. He doesn't have cancer. And he is very intelligent. He knows what he's doing. And he probably is looking for a wedge here too. He's losing 45,000 people a month. So this is flat land, like Trump says. Like, you put tanks in here, you edge forward as much as you can, but the only thing stopping those tanks and those bullets are humans. And so that's what's happening, is that Ukraine's losing a ton of people, Russia's losing a ton of people. And so putting a pause in this to try to just figure out what everyone's doing, that would be nice. Putin will probably use this in his favor, but I don't think either side has a reason to want a ceasefire. The Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, this is what I was talking about. This is the map of all these attacks. Really important in this is that while we have these attacks in the Red Sea, everybody's just going around the Horn of Africa. They're almost doubling their shipping times and their shipping routes. That costs a lot of money. That is inflationary. Like, it takes more crude oil and more diesel in those vessels to go around the world. And so if we could just go back through and go through the Strait and actually go into Europe, that would be awesome. But we haven't been able to do that because the Houthis are sending their drones and we could have been plinking this off a long time ago. We haven't been. So now that Yemen and Houthis say we're going to start attacking again because Israel's attacking, and Trump says, okay, we're going to attack you and we're going to hold Iran responsible. So that's what's happening. Iran is exporting in probably about 2 million barrels a day to China. This is what they show on paper, that here's their exports, here's how much is going to China. That is Iranian production in purple on the right there. That line shows you their production dropped off when we enforced the sanctions. We had sanctions under Biden, he just didn't enforce them. And they knew that. They knew from day one that Biden wanted to cut a deal with Iran. And so they've just been exporting their barrels like crazy to China. If you take 2 million barrels a day times $80 a barrel, back of the envelope, you're looking at over $4 billion a month. That is definitely enough money to fund all those fun H groups, the Hamas, Houthis, and Hezbollah, which they're doing. So the OPEC and Saudis nod to Trump. I mean, there was a lot of talk and commentary on the stock market about how the Saudis are not playing ball with Trump. Clearly, the fact that they came out and said we are going to be adding barrels back in April, that is a nod to the Trump administration. So they're being quiet in this, but they have spare capacity. So another big reason why oil prices are not as high as they should be is because we have so much spare capacity. Saudi Arabia is producing under 9 million barrels per day for crude oil. They're producing a lot more with NGLs and everything, but under 9 million barrels a day. They've said very vocally and very clearly they can bring that up to 12 million barrels per day. And I know a lot of you will say 12 million barrels a day, can they do that? Well, we've never actually asked them to. Like, the market has never actually asked Saudi Arabia to produce 12 million barrels a day for several months on end. So be careful when you think you have the answer to that. And because you probably want to know what they're producing, it's really important just to stare at this chart. The black line is our production, U.S. crude oil production at 13.5 million barrels a day. There's WTI and Brent prices there in green. And then you see Russian and Saudi production. And what you see is that they're actually kind of in line. Like, you realize that it's not going to be that hard for them to bring barrels back, that Russian production has been very resilient, but we have really gapped out our production growth and their production decline. So OPEC production, I'm just going to beat this home again. That's OPEC production. We are producing almost half of what OPEC production is. Like, that is so incredibly impressive. So if you were to go back to a 2008 forecast from EIA or OPEC, they would have been dead wrong, because they would have, in 2008, we were producing less than 5 million barrels per day in the US. So just really, really important to keep in mind, folks, of how wrong everyone was. And we are exporting, we're the largest exporter in the entire world. We're exporting way more than Saudi or Russia right now. You can see this in the actual data, over 11 million barrels a day of production we are exporting. That is so much revenue that we're bringing to the US that we are not sending abroad. So very, very serious. And this does get to the point of, yes, we need high enough oil prices to make this work. But at this point, you really can't have super high oil prices, because you're going to hurt the consumer even worse than they're hurt. And then you're not going to have the demand. We're also exporting 14 BCF a day of LNG. It's very, very important that the stuff that Chris Wright talks about of actually exporting LNG, getting the permits, getting the approvals, putting that in place. It's a 53 BCF a day global market. So LNG is only 53 BCF a day in 2023 out of a 400 billion cubic feet per day market. It's new and it's nascent, and it needs to be developed, and we need to be leading that. So we absolutely need the infrastructure. The SPR, this is what I kind of call the put or the floor on prices. I am not super concerned about $45 oil, because I think if we get very low, or even to 50, we will just start refilling the SPR. This needs to be talked about and better articulated to the market, but this is something that Trump has in his back pocket for the Saudis as well. I'm sure this has been a part of the conversation of saying, if we add these barrels back, what happens? You're gonna sanction Iran, we'll add these barrels back, but if we get too low, what happens? And he says, we'll refill the SPR. Okay, consumer sentiment. It is not good. The health of the consumer. I spent the weekend doing this because I thought this was really important. If you look at Kohl's and Costco, they're telling you two very different stories, and they're both not good. Kohl's is, and no offense to shoppers at Kohl's, I think they have great stuff. I just don't do a lot of shopping there. Kohl's is your lower income, your $50,000 and under, and your $100,000 and under discretionary consumer, okay? So when Kohl's is having a bad day, it's telling you that the discretionary is going away for the lower income consumer. Costco is your higher end income consumer. And when they're having a bad day on grocery, they're telling you that the higher income consumer is starting to feel it in grocery. Those are not good stories. And so this is what happened to the stock market over the past few weeks, is you had Kohl's on March 11th, you had Costco on March 6th. But last week you had this, and then you've had all these data points. Again, these swans just keep like swimming up closer to you. And so Kohl's says, if you're making less than 50 grand, you're hurting. If you're making 100, and they feel that. They also mention inflation, and they realize that every incremental bit of inflation is eating at these consumers a little more. And then Costco, they talk about meat, and they talk about the shift, the downshifting of their consumer going to ground beef instead of steaks, and going to poultry. Ground beef prices are $6 a pound right now. They're $2 more than they were pre-COVID. It's just inflation. I can't beat this one home enough, or like underline it enough. Like, we have the sticky and persistent inflation. Yes, it's come down from these highs, but we still have inflation on top of this already high inflation. And for most people in America, it's just killing them when they go to the grocery store and they keep seeing those prices higher. So shelter inflation is still above 4%. Services, like what we're actually paying people, is still above 4%. And food prices have recently ticked up to 2.6%. This is another money slide, a takeaway. I didn't stretch it all the way back because you couldn't see anything, but you have inflation in here in orange, you have unemployment in purple, you have Fed funds or your interest rate in black, and you have WTI in green. So one of the big takeaways here is that we have had previous bouts of high oil prices without having inflation, right? We have had high oil prices previously without this massive bout of inflation. What we had recently was a period of high inflation and high oil prices. And what you'll notice here is that this, when we stopped raising interest rates and we started lowering them aggressively, too soon, inflation came back. Literally, there's a direct correlation. When that black line goes down, the orange line is going up. That is a problem. So they didn't do the job. The Fed has not done a good job. They didn't do it when inflation was high. They have not had a good trajectory here. They're not on good footing. And now we have some weakening in the economy, and they can lower interest rates, but it's not like, I don't feel like they have a control of this. And almost always, it's both after your period of high inflation and after a period of raising interest rates, you get a spike in unemployment. It lags about 2 years every time. We also have a lot of debt. So mortgage debt is $12.6 trillion. That was the amount of total household debt that we had in 2008. So that red chunk there, that is mortgage debt, everything else is on top of it. We're looking at over $18 trillion in US household debt. And you can see on the other side all those sectors. This is meaningful because the consumer has this debt and they have this inflation. And so yes, their credit card rates are high and everything, but really they're just having trouble paying their bills. And Chris Wright, he mentioned the thousands of people who have had electricity disconnects. I mean, if you can just imagine that in a modern day in America with all this natural gas and all this energy, the people's electricity is getting disconnected because they haven't been able to afford their bills. Well, my bill at my house is 3 times what it was in Denver, what it was pre-COVID. I have $300 a month utility bill for a 1,400 square foot house. That is absolutely insane. And this is the problem people are having because they just can't pay. If we're looking at gasoline demand and vehicle miles traveled, you're going to see that red line is vehicle miles traveled. I'm not telling you it's rolling over, but it doesn't look amazing. And we've definitely ticked down in gasoline demand where we're not where we were this sort of 2019 to 2020. That's partly because people work from home, that's changes in behavior. Maybe that's itty bitty bit, might be a little bit of EVs, but really that's change in behavior. And we're just not growing our gasoline demand. Airlines, this is a really big one on the consumer sentiment. I listened to all these calls. The 3 big airlines spoke at the JP Morgan this conference last week. This was a big thing that moved the stock market. The stock market's giving a lot of noise, but you have to go through the noise and pull this stuff out. And Delta talked about, all of them talked about something happening with the consumer, some erosion in consumer sentiment. And Delta really talked about the accidents that happened at the beginning of the year. And then they thought, okay, well, is it the accidents or is something going on? And then what's happened is that all of them have realized they're having broader softness. People are not booking the same flights. They're definitely seeing that there's a government impact when we've lost government employees, we've also lost government contractors, and a lot of those people fly. And so that's had an impact on airlines. And that last minute booking, the people that you guys are booking a flight to wherever you're going, you're doing it at the last minute and you're paying $1,000 a ticket, that's really slowed. And so all of this is collectively really scaring people a little bit in the economy. Jet fuel demand, it's kind of in line with oil prices. That's jet fuel demand in blue. You can see it has not come back to pre-COVID levels. I was a little worried about this before. It works well when prices are pretty stable, but we look like we're about to roll over in air passenger miles. And I was saying this to clients in January and December, and that's what the airlines are telling us now, is we're kind of too hot to trot. Diesel demand is a little bit concerning. That's oil prices, that's diesel demand. It's not tanking, but it kind of looks like it's on that softer trajectory. And that's the sending packages, that's rail, that's everything. That correlates with truck tonnage. These just are a little bit soft. If you look at housing starts and oil prices, there is a correlation. Interestingly enough, that single family home starts in yellow. You'll notice that they started tanking well before the recession, right? Well before 2008, they were nosediving. We don't quite have that now. We've actually had this really nice correlation between oil prices and housing. But right now we have a big problem in housing because everybody's mortgaged their house at 3% or under. Nobody wants to sell their house. Mortgages are 7% still. And so you can't buy a house. Well, what happens is when people lose their job, they have to sell their house or because they have to move or something. And that's what we haven't had up to this point is having to sell your house. That purple line is apartments. That's just another one to look at is that we've actually built out a lot of housing. So everybody says we need to own a home. No, you do not need to own a home. You can rent. It is okay. And it's very expensive to own a home, and we built out a lot of apartments. So I don't buy the thing that we don't have. We need more housing, but we do have a lot of apartments, and that will weigh on housing prices at some point. Our interest payment on our debt is about as much as our military expenditures. So we have $1.7 trillion in our deficit, but our interest payments on that are over $1 trillion, and that is the same amount as our military budget. This is a big problem. I am all for reducing government waste and expenditures and getting our house in order. I do not want to start with the military. In this geopolitical sphere, I'm explaining to you guys, it is really serious that we have the best damn military in the world and that we really understand what's going on. Energy is a huge part of that, but we have about over $1 trillion in military expenditures. I would actually like to keep it that way. German manufacturing, it all comes back to energy. This is German auto manufacturing on the right. You can see how it's ticked down. They've had incredible exposure to China, right? They let the Chinese come into their economy and just dump autos all over the place, and Germany exports to China. Well, if China's economy is not doing well and they're undercutting their own prices, China revived dead, mothballed EV companies last year. So they took zombie companies that were dead when we already have too many EVs, and they pulled them out and asked them to build more EVs. Why? They did that so they could undercut every auto manufacturer in the world, and you're seeing it in Germany where Volkswagen is just getting decimated. But importantly, in Germany and Italy and all these countries, they are still an industrial heartland of Europe. They're still industrialized countries. And the problem is they've been decimated because now, obviously, Russia cut off the gas. Well, they had this surge in electricity prices. EU electricity prices are about 30 cents a kilowatt hour. It's extremely expensive. And that is Germany's grid. So Germany's grid has actually declined. So for all the talk of electrifying and doing all this energy transition, they're not doing it. They're actually just decreasing their grid. That is the sign of a declining economy. That is not going to be a country that can build you tanks and ammunitions and bullets and everything. Like, they just can't do it. So when you're hearing the stuff in the stock market, they're going to have to build out their grid to make this work. And that is a horrible grid. That is renewables, which is largely wind and solar, and their coal and their baseload declining. That is why the electricity prices are so high, is because their renewables have increased and they've taken down the baseload power generation, and that has come at the cost of their consumer and their industry. Ukrainian power generation, I put this in here only to say that energy is everything. Russia has attacked Ukrainian power infrastructure. So you can see it wasn't very good to begin with, right? This is their total terawatt hours by fuel source. It wasn't a great grid to begin with, but then they started putting attacks on this. Well, Ukraine is out there trying to fix their power gen. They're trying to fix their power lines, and that's a big morale portion, right? Even if you're not fighting this war, if you are on the front lines and you're trying to fix that power pole and you're getting bombed or you're getting hit, that's a problem. Well, they were attacking this infrastructure because that's how they're building their weapon systems, and Ukraine's trying to make drones. Again, it all comes back to power generation. They have to have the power. So there's a reason why they did that. Here in the US, we have seen this rising electricity prices. You see there in red, and that's our grid. That's all our power generation stacked up. If you break that out and you just stack up wind and solar and you put it against electricity prices, and then you look at coal, you do see, hey, we've had this massive rise in wind and solar power generation, and we've reduced coal. It's so important here because this is why natural gas, the reason natural gas worked for so many years in our grid, which is half of our grid, is because we have this cheap, reliable baseload power in addition to gas. We've got coal, super, super cheap. Prices don't go up and down like natural gas prices can. And so when you're pulling out this coal like crazy, you start getting the exposure for the increasing wind and solar prices and the lack of reliability and the intermittency, but you also have the price spikes and exposure to natural gas. So you need coal. And very importantly, and I told your group before this talk this morning, is that this is Henry Hub versus residential natural gas prices. So the utilities companies are screwing over the consumer. When you fill up your tank for oil, you feel a lower or higher price depending on what oil is. Oil prices go up, 3 weeks later you feel it at the pump. Oil prices go down, 3 weeks later you feel it at the pump. That is not the same for natural gas prices. Natural gas prices are in green here. Last year, Henry Hub was $2 an MCF on average. You all felt that. It was terrible. Your residential natural gas prices were $18 an MCF. That is highway robbery, and it's criminal. And this is how we address fixing the situation in the US, because we have the energy. We are just not getting this disseminated through the system. Chinese coal-fired power generation. It's 1/3 of the world's total power generation, 1/3. So the global power generation is about 30,000 terawatt hours. China has about 10,000 terawatt hours of this. That alone should make you all want to put your hands up and go start working on national security issues, because this is a really scary thing when they have 1/3 of the world's power generation. 5,700 terawatt hours of that are in coal. We don't even have 5,700 terawatt hours in our grid. So we have half the grid that they do. We have 4,500 terawatt hours. Less than 1,000 are in coal. So if we're talking about emissions, that is not what I'm worried about. But if you want to talk about emissions, which I'll show you in a second, we're still doing well. World coal production and consumption is at an absolutely record high. So when we debate and talk about, are we having an energy transition, are we not? I say we're definitely not, because we've added this wind and solar. It's just decreased the reliability of the grid, and we've added oil, coal, and natural gas consumption, the traditional fuel consumption. So coal is at an all-time high, natural gas is at an all-time high. Chinese coal consumption is more than half of the world's global coal consumption. That's global oil consumption. It's around 100 million barrels a day. Global natural gas consumption, 400 BCF a day. I'm almost done, folks, bear with me. This is your global CO2 emissions, so that's Chinese CO2 emissions. It's about 13,000 million metric tons. That's US CO2 emissions. That is thanks to natural gas. That is just declining like that. So we are not even in the same ballpark as China for emissions. So if you're trying to win the war on emissions, you're not going to win it. It's over. Like, China's going to continue on this path. I've told you all the reasons why. That is their grid. We are the largest oil and gas producer in the world, and I'm going to leave this on a really positive note. That black line is our oil production, 13.5 million barrels per day. That's gas, 128 billion cubic feet per day. We can't help ourselves. When gas prices go up, we produce more natural gas. It's a small molecule. It's awesome. It's the driver in the Delaware to pull out the oil. I really think we need to appreciate the role of natural gas prices and the role of maybe lower oil prices and what the Trump administration is doing. But this is U.S. oil production, and I will say, I think we can grow to 15 million barrels a day. I am not with the peak oil folks. We do need stable prices. We don't need $75. We need higher than 50. We will probably keep growing even if prices tick down. We're not going to be growing massively at $50 oil by no means, but we do see growth even at lower prices. And what we have seen is a lot of private operators, probably you folks in the room, you know that your margins are better than they were even when prices were higher because you're doing a better job with your business, and that is a really good thing. Natural gas production and natural gas prices, that is just one trajectory. So the takeaway here is that we do have a natural gas problem. Like, we have a lot of natural gas. We could produce double this if we actually wanted to, but we would need the infrastructure. So what's going to happen is we are going to export more LNG. And I'm going to close in a minute, but I want to leave you with a couple things. We have to debunk the myth that's in the market that the Trump administration is going to increase LNG exports and then we're going to have a spike in natural gas prices and we won't have natural gas enough to light our light bulbs. Not true. We definitely have the natural gas. The industry needs to be talking about this, but we need to be able to, one, keep the baseload coal-fired power generation, and we need to be able to export this gas to keep the price of gas high enough to make this work for everyone here. And higher natural gas prices, access to permits, the ability to be able to drill on federal land and get a permit, the ability to lease in the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America or whatever you want to call it, the ability to lease in Alaska, all these things are really positive. So a reduced regulatory environment, increased LNG exports, slightly higher natural gas prices tells me that yes, you can work with slightly lower oil prices. And I think that's what you need to expect with this administration. They probably need to be explaining that a little bit more, and I'd be happy to help them with that. Historical shift in U.S. oil production. I only put this out to just nerd out with this later. Look at the shift that we've had. That low point where we were at 4.8 million barrels a day, and people said we don't have anything and we're screwed. And look at what's happened since then. Look in the 20 years how we've changed this. So if you think you know what's going to happen, I just really caution you to realize that we're still recovering less than 10% of this oil that we're getting out, and we've changed the map, both in the US and the globe. Texas and New Mexico. New Mexico's a harsh regulatory environment, but you're producing over 2 million barrels a day in 2 counties, and it's just incredible. That production growth has moved up regardless of price. Oil production growth in New Mexico has just went like this, just went straight up regardless of price, even through COVID. So I'm not certain that you're going to have a downward trajectory in production in New Mexico, even if prices are lowered. But Saudi Arabia is producing at 9 million barrels a day, and Texas and New Mexico together are producing almost as much, 8 million barrels per day. So extremely impressive. Also, you are seeing this quiet growth, and people really aren't paying attention to this, but look at Utah, look at Wyoming, look at Ohio. Collectively, they are producing 600,000 barrels per day because they're just adding and they're going. Uinta is just crushing it. Again, this isn't a ton, but collectively, 600,000 barrels a day in this market does matter. How we're able to do this, we've got 592 rigs running, but we are on an average lateral length of about 11,000 feet. And if you're in the Permian, you're looking at 4,000 feet. You're looking at 2 mile, 3 mile, 4 mile laterals. And so really important with this is we're doing more with less, you have longer laterals, but it's what you're getting out of them, right? It's our diminishing marginal returns. We're still getting the oil out. And I do think several years ago, when I was talking to folks, say 5 years ago, people were skeptical about how much oil they were going to get out of the toe of that well that's 3 miles out. Sit here, a well that's 4 miles out, to think that you're not going to have massive diminishing marginal returns on the toe of that well, that's very impressive. And I just want you to kind of postulate 10 years from now where we're going to be, if we're still going to be are we going to be getting more out of that toe? And I would say yes, we're going to be getting more out of the toe because we're going to know the rock better. How many wells we have left to drill at that point is another question. This is your U.S. public rig map as of right now. The public companies are in orange, the private companies are purple. The public companies are very cored up, right? They got their acreage, they're all cored up. This is what Scott Sheffield calls the core of the core in the tier 1. Yes, but all those purple companies are the privates, they're outside the core and they're still making money. So that's just what the rig count looks like in the US, how it's split. The private companies really, really came back after COVID. They eclipsed the public companies. That shifted. We've since had a lot of acquisitions, but we are doing more with less. And again, I'm literally about to close. So this is US horizontal completions. Stay with me, folks. US horizontal completions, another super nerdy slide. That's your actual completions, wells brought online and into production. The orange bar is public companies, the purple bar on top is private companies. That's WTI prices, and those are the corresponding rig counts. And you can see they move together, right? We have not added as many wells back as we had pre-COVID, yet we're producing way more oil than we were pre-COVID with less wells, less rigs. So something is working. And if you break that out for private and public, then this is so important to look at, is because look at private companies. Completions go up and the rig count goes up directly with oil prices. What you're seeing is a recent gap out, which is corresponding to the regulatory environment. Trump is saying we're open for business, particularly in places like Wyoming where you have federal land, and operators are saying let's go, even with prices being lower. And there's definitely a sentiment with private operators that have had a massive regulatory monkey on their back for 4 years, and they are ready to rip because they're happy with this administration. That's your decline curve, the diminishing marginal returns, what I was saying. It's really not smashed in oil. Pay attention to gas, because that line, that green line there that's dotted, that is natural gas in 2022 when we had gas prices at $6.50 that just ripped, and everybody in the oil industry was targeting natural gas in their wells. So with that, thank you guys so much. Really appreciate your time.
I think we have time for a couple of questions. If anybody,
I'm hanging out for a minute, so you get time. So this is free consulting. Like, I'm looking for some like hard balls, some fast balls. Let's see them. Yep.
Coming to me. All right. So Wall Street Journal just said Putin agreed to a limited ceasefire against Ukraine's energy infrastructure during a call with Trump, but remained resistant to longer peace plan. What's your hot take?
It's just, that's what Putin would do. He'd just say we're doing it, but we're not doing it. So he's not gonna, it's not a ceasefire for Putin. I had to delete a lot of slides, but the one of, Putin in his military gear, I don't know if I had that in here or not, like Putin in his military gear, that was literally, that just was last week. Like, he went and put his military gear on just to show everyone. So the hot take is he's not really interested in a real ceasefire. Trump wants one. Trump's on it. He knows the reality of like, this isn't great. And Putin has reasons to want it, but if they're just saying that the ceasefire is only on
energy infrastructure.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not going to hit your energy infrastructure, but I'm going to hit everything else. Yeah, that's not a ceasefire. But that means that oil prices could tick up a couple dollars a barrel.
So how much does Zelensky want to end this conflict?
Zelensky wants to end the conflict, but he wants, let me cover this. I'll be very, very honest about Ukraine. This is was not a thriving, rip-roaring democracy. It was a beautiful place to visit, probably pre-war in Ukraine. Was not a rip-roaring democracy pre-war in Ukraine. I showed you their power generation. It wasn't great to begin with. This was not a thriving economy. So it was kind of a perfect place to like go after, and Putin saw that, and they've been going after them since 2014, right? They took Crimea in 2014. The Western world did nothing. I was up in arms about it. I thought it was horrible. They downed a plane. Civilians died. You could see their body parts if you were following the news. You could see the body parts thrown all over Ukraine. The Western world did nothing. And now, obviously, they invaded, and the Western world still did nothing. We gave a bunch of arms to Ukraine, but we didn't do anything past that. If you want to end the war, put your troops on the ground and watch it end in 2 weeks. But we didn't do that. So you have to be bold, and we didn't do that. So Zelensky wants a peace deal, but he wants guaranteed security. He wants the U.S. to have some kind of foothold. Basically, he knows if the U.S. has any kind of investment, any kind of business deal or anything, it's going to mean that the U.S. is going to give some kind of security backing. He knows that Zelensky knows Trump enough and knows just the U.S. enough that we're not going to completely be out, even if we say we're out. So he wants some kind of agreement in place. He needs the Germany and the UK and everyone to actually put peace troops on the ground. He would love it if we would do the same thing. The only way you can secure a ceasefire, and he knows it, is that you have to have peacekeeping troops. I think Trump hopes that we could have a ceasefire and we wouldn't have those troops. That's not going to happen because Putin's going to keep pushing the line. And he's just going to lie and say, no, we didn't. But that's what he'll be doing. So that's where we're still odds. I do think that you're hearing some more honest commentary from Trump saying, if he doesn't play ball, we're going to increase sanctions. Yes, and you should be telling Putin that. You should be playing hardball with him and saying, if you don't do this, we're going to ramp up sanctions on you. And we're going to tell if we increase oil prices, I'm going to ask the industry to increase output. We got the Saudis increasing output, but it's complicated. But I do think Ukraine wants a ceasefire. Their average age of person on the front lines is 43. They don't have enough people. And this isn't because they can't get people. Just don't have enough people. And so yes, they need to lower the conscription age. But if they lower the conscription age, then they're worried they're not going to have people to populate Ukraine in the future. That's a real worry. They do probably have to lower the conscription age, though. So this is a negotiation. This is messy. This is war. This is not easy. So I don't mean to offend anybody with a commentary, but this is how it is. It sucks.
So for troops on the ground, potentially, sanctions, is attacking Russia's energy structure ever on the table? And if so, what's the ramifications?
Well, in last summer, we basically had Putin, we allowed our missiles, we didn't allow, Ukraine decided to use our weapons and attack Russia. And that everybody thought that was going to be a red line. Well, we allowed that. We just basically said, okay, go ahead. And I think Biden asked Zelensky to stop doing that, and he was like, okay, cool. No, we're going to keep doing it. Prices went up a little bit. Like if they did dent a little bit, like they attacked some infrastructure. If we say, okay, Zelensky, here's some more weapons, go attack Russian infrastructure, the energy infrastructure, it does help in terms of chips on the table. It does incentivize Putin to want to come to the table. If we actually curtailed his exports of oil and gas, that would help a lot, because I had to take out these slides, but their revenue has just been really well maintained. So it would increase prices, but you'd have to, in order to offset that, if they reduce barrels on the market but they got higher prices, they still have the revenue. You'd have to have lower prices and less barrels, or you have to play the ball of like, I can have high prices, but they can't be exporting barrels. So at 10 million barrels per day, it's a lot of crude oil on the market. So it's going to be hard to move the needle there. Yep.
Trisha, thank you for your poignant oversight. I really appreciate it. So my question is regarding small modular reactors and advanced nuclear tech. Do you think that they're going to disrupt the energy mix, or what are your thoughts on that?
It's a really good question. So we have had more talk about nuclear and more talk about small modular reactors, which has kind of breathed some new life and excitement. I think nuclear is great, but I think there's a lot of hype on small nuclear reactors, and the reality of even if they work, getting them built, getting the permitting and the reform, we're just not there. So I am skeptical just from a macroeconomist of looking at this, of like, as much as people want this, the ability to actually build it and get it into the grid is a lot harder. And we've been talking about this for decades, and we just haven't been able to do it. So the answer, if we could do it, would be small modular reactors. I think the problem is, if you're looking at the stock market, you're seeing that hype and you're seeing that euphoria getting baked in, but we're not seeing it in the reality. I think it's definitely something Chris Wright talks about nuclear he would like, but actually, full scale, get it into the grid, and should we see that wedge of nuclear go up? I don't see that anytime soon. But it's certainly something that when I talk to natural gas guys, that's something that they're thinking about, like, when could we start seeing erosion on natural gas from small nuclear reactors? And I would say it's not it's not anytime soon right now.
Thank you very much.
But great question.
Thank you.
You showed on one of your charts that on China, real estate screaming down, manufacturers ramping up. I mean, is Chinese economy in a recession, or what's that?
Okay, so the Chinese economy is, it's controlled. So Xi Jinping is definitely, like, he realized during COVID, like, he's been incrementally controlling the economy for a long time, but they've been a coal-based economy for a long time, a manufacturing economy for a long time. And so if they wanted to fix the consumer side, they could. They could actually just stimulate and fix it. They don't want to. That is a choice. Now, they have massive debt. Like, I'm not talking like a little bit of debt. We're talking about tens of trillions of dollars in local government debt from the housing sector, right? That's just where they have people paying mortgages right now for houses that are not built. Okay, that in a place where they're having declining property values that was just down. I don't know if you saw it just a couple days ago. It's down like 5%. So property values continue to decline. That's what I say is the consumer sector, right? They could fix that if they wanted to. Would cost them money, but they're not. They're just doubling down on the manufacturing side, which is both desperation and genius, right? Because if I'm doubling down on the manufacturing side and I'm making really cheap robotics and really cheap everything, and I'm the only game in town for bio, and everybody's coming to me because I'm China and I'm going to give you free rent and free electricity and free water and free everything, that means that no one can compete with me in the future, because I'm going to raise the barrier to entry and make it so high that no one can compete. That is what they're doing. So I think this is it's hard because I study this for a living and I spend a lot of time on that. I mean, you should see my dining room right now. There's a lot of sticky notes everywhere and books piled to the sky. I have every book written on China for the last 20 years. I've read it. it's extremely complicated, but it feels like it's a lot more about control than it is about the health of the economy. And I think Xi Jinping has had it's a modern surveillance state, right? The province of Xinjiang is completely surveilled, right? They used that and they took all those measures and they implemented that actually across all of China during COVID. And then they were like, wow, this worked kind of nice. Let's just keep this. So they have unprecedented control, and we're just not, you don't hear the pushback, because how many of you have been to China lately? Like, no one goes. Like, I can't actually go because I work for the government. I have contracts with the government. And because of that, I will be picked up in China. So, I mean, it's a game-changing move. So it's really, really serious. I can happy to explain it more offline, but and it is something that I do think the industry and folks, just CEOs and executives and businesses, really do need to understand China a lot better, understand how we're competing with them, especially on the manufacturing side, especially how it relates to energy. So I would say single biggest point, it's control. The consumer's declining, manufacturing's going up. Not like it's great, but we cannot be looking to them, though, for the oil demand growth or saving us, because that 2 million barrels a day, that's all being stockpiled.
You mentioned growth in LNG exports. How about domestic power generation on the natural gas side? Any growth?
So there is growth. So we right now about half our grid, if you saw on the charts, is natural gas, and we're incrementally growing. We have demand for it right now. We have to be careful about how much real demand we have for AI, but there is some, and we haven't grown our grid in a long time. We don't want to be Germany declining. We need to be growing out this. And I was talking to the board earlier. I think you need to view electricity and power generation and access to power generation. I mean, the way the Chinese are doing it, they just have tons of it, and then everybody can get it easily. You need that in the US, right? It's like a pipeline for the Permian Basin. I need abundant access to pipeline capacity so my differentials don't blow out. You don't want that, or I have a discount to my crude or natural gas. I want the same thing in electricity. I want redundant and affordable electricity so that I incentivize businesses to build and manufacturing to build, Ford to build here, everybody to have access. So we have room to add more natural gas, absolutely. We can add more natural gas in the electricity pool. We need to back out the renewables, put natural gas in its place, and we have to stop, like Barna stop right now decommissioning coal-fired power generation. So we can stem the bleeding and we can lean on coal when we have those spikes in natural gas. So I think the big takeaway for the oil and gas industry is that you need coal. You need to stop coal being decommissioned out of the grid, number one right now, so that you can enable more natural gas growth. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of like dovetailing with some of these answers. What about geothermal?
So, and geothermal is kind of like nuclear. I mean, I'm not against geothermal. I like it. I think it can work, but it's at the same place, I would say, a little bit of like scale. Like, can you scale it? Can I scale small modular reactors? Like, I definitely have more opportunity with small modular reactors than I do with large scale nuclear, because it's very, very hard to build it. Costs just go up exponentially. Sometimes we do have to think as a country, we have to invest in things that don't make money. Energy, and I'm not saying we need to subsidize everything, but we do have to think of if you spend time on geopolitics and war, you think about shipbuilding and technology and things. If you think about geothermal, can I scale it out? Can I spread it around quickly? I don't think it's there yet. There are definitely places where it works, and we should be working on that. But you still, from a scalability standpoint, eating into the grid and taking 1,000 terawatt hours, no, not right now.
How does Latin America fit into this?
How does Latin America fit into this? Well, they've been quiet, so probably importantly so. I mean, obviously, I talked about Mexico. The Mexico thing is really, really big. If you look at just how much Chinese investment has been in Mexico, it is the footprint has quadrupled in the past 4 years. So as Trump put the original tariffs on China in 2018, you've just seen China dump massive amounts of money into Mexico. Really conveniently, they'll just bypass the tariffs. That's what they've been doing. Same as Vietnam. Look at your Yeti. Look where it's made. Vietnam, Malaysia, not China. Well, the solar panel, it's not made in China either. Yeah, they are. They just got a sticker that says Malaysia on them. Latin America is hugely important because they're south of the border, and the role of China is so heavily present in all of these countries. Brazil is like their number one trading partner is China. Well, Brazil even has a 25% tariff on steel because even though they're friends with China, they get their steel dumped on them. We do have to appreciate that every other country in the world uses tariffs all day long like crazy because they're smaller economies and they're not very resilient. And so Brazil put those tariffs in place, and they still trade with China. But the presence that China has with all these countries is very deep and it's very sticky. And so if push comes to shove, Latin America is probably not going our way. They're probably going China's. And so the role is very significant. It's kind of like Ukraine, different. We have to deal with corruption. We have to deal with drugs. We have, fentanyl. The list is long and massive. And the healthier these countries are and the healthier their economies are, the better the more investment they're going to have from developed nations like the U.S. and the less they're going to have from China. Everybody's talking about the Vaca Muerta again and Argentina. And we were talking about it 12 years ago, and now we're talking about it again. So this stuff ebbs and flows, but it's hugely important in the geopolitical chess game. And I apologize for not giving enough credence here, but it's a great question.
What do you see coming from India? How does it fit into this?
It's big. I again didn't have time for it. They're about 5.5 million barrels a day of crude oil demand and consumption. Their grid is largely coal. They're significantly smaller in proportional size to China. So when we think about India, usually the first gut reaction is like, are they going to supplant China? They definitely have the population growth from a demographic standpoint. That's positive. But when you go look under the hood, their economy is very, very messy. So for all the talk of democracy, like women have the rights for women have really been scaled back. You don't have very few women actually in the workforce. The economy has a lot of corruption. Coal will never die ever because it's like mafia owned and entrenched. So you have a lot of systemic issues, and we definitely, I think, as a country, geopolitically, we need to bring them alongside us, and we do need to break up the Russian-China love fest as well, which I think is partly what Trump is trying to do. Maybe not perfectly, but there's an angle there. But India, it's not going to supplant China, and it's messy, and they played everybody kind of well, right? They purchase more Russian crude than anyone right now, about 2.5 million barrels per day. So they're happy to take this cheap Russian crude, and they say they're not aligned. But they are really important, and we think of any kind of conflict with China, where's India gonna side? They'll probably side with us, but I would like them to be a little bit more vocal about it. And we certainly would, if we're going to sanction Russian crude, we're going to need to get India in. We're going to need them to get alongside with us. So I think the interest by keeping them close. There's an interest there. I don't think we've done a super great job of that. All right, guys. Thank you.